Hello. Welcome back to the channel. Everybody come on in, sit down, do your thing. Please hit the like, share, and subscribe. I appreciate people who come in. So you guys see the moniker. You see the title of the thumbnail, right? Conservatives or conservatism is dead. Now, every time I hear a MAGA supporter or a MAGA person, they tell me they're conservative. Every time. We're conservative. I find myself shaking my head because I'm old enough to remember when conservatives actually had principles they weren't willing to abandon. Now, before somebody gets mad at me, let me be clear. I didn't agree with Ronald Reagan on a lot of things. He was a raving racist, which is antithetical against all the things that I believe in. And I didn't vote for John McCain. This isn't nostalgia, and it isn't me wishing Republicans would come back. This is me pointing out that the people who built modern conservatism would barely recognize the movement that claims to carry their banner today, which is the MAGA movement. The reason this bothers me is because conservatives used to spend an awful lot of time telling the rest of us the principles mattered more than personalities. They told us the Constitution mattered more than politicians. They told us character mattered. They told us integrity mattered. They told us personal responsibility mattered. Whether you agree with them or not, there was at least a framework that the conservative movement was working with. Where the fuck is the framework now? There was a set of standards they claim applied to everybody. The argument was never supposed to be follow this man wherever he leads. The argument was supposed to be follow these principles no matter who is in charge. That's why I keep coming back to John McCain. I think John McCain is one of the most revealing figures in modern American politics because the way MAGA talks about him today tells us everything we need to know about how much the movement has changed. Here was a man who served his country in uniform in the Congress. Here was a man who spent years as a prisoner of war. And here was a man who had every opportunity to put himself first, and he didn't. Conservatives used to hold him up as the embodiment of duty and sacrifice and patriotism. They pointed to him as proof that honor still mattered in public life. Today, many of those same people talk about him like he was an enemy. Think about how strange that is. What exactly did John McCain do that was so unforgivable? Did he become a liberal? Did he stop being a conservative? No. Did he suddenly abandon the Republican Party? No, he did not. His real crime was that he refused to surrender every principle he had held in service to one man. That's what made John McCain unacceptable. Not his conservatism, his independence. And that's where I think the story really begins right here. Because if Ronald Reagan and John McCain walked into a MAGA rally today and simply repeated the things they actually believed during their political careers, I don't think they'd be celebrated. I think they'd be attacked. Reagan talked about America as a shining city on a hill. He talked about immigration as a source of strength. He talked about America as a place people from around the world wanted to join because of what it represented. John McCain spent years of defending America's alliances, and arguing that American leadership in the world mattered. Neither one of those men was interested in turning America inward. Neither man spent every waking hour telling Americans they should be afraid of each other. Neither man built a political identity around resentment. What strikes me about today's political movement and involvement is how much of it seems to be driven by anger. Every day there's a new enemy, there's a new problem. Every day there's a new betrayal. Every day there's a new group that supposedly threatens the country. And after a while, I started asking myself a simple question. What the fuck happened to the confidence that this country is supposed to have? What happened to the optimism? What happened to the belief that America was strong enough to survive disagreement, strong enough to absorb change, strong enough to welcome people who were different? Because when Reagan spoke about America, whether you agree with him or not, he sounded like somebody who believed in the country's future. When McCain spoke about America, he sounded like somebody who believed service to the country came before service to a political movement. What I hear today is so different. What I hear today is a movement that increasingly measures every issue through one question. Does it help Donald Trump or hurt Donald Trump? That's not an accident. Donald Trump didn't just inherit a conservative movement that was already changing. He accelerated that change. He rewarded it. He built an entire political identity around grievances. Before Trump, conservatisms wanted to be seen as strong. They wanted to be seen as self-reliant. They wanted to be seen as people who took responsibility for their lives. Trump taught millions of people that they were victims. Victims of the media, victims of immigrants, victims of universities, victims of government, victims of elections, victims of cultural change. The movement that once mocked victimhood suddenly built its entire identity on being a victim. That's what the MAGA movement and Republicans are today. Victims. What the fuck is going on? And that to me is where conservatism started to die. Not because Donald Trump is uniquely powerful and not because his supporters are uniquely bad. Conservatism started to die because millions of people who once claimed to believe in principles discovered that their principles had conditions attached to them. The Constitution mattered until it became inconvenient. Character mattered until it became inconvenient. Fiscal responsibility mattered until it became inconvenient. Personal responsibility and accountability mattered until it became inconvenient. Suddenly, every principle, conservative principle, had an asterisk next to it. That's why I don't think this is primarily a policy discussion. People always want to turn it into one. They want to argue about immigration. They want to argue about trade, argue about taxes, argue about gays, argue about trans. Those debates matter. Of course, taxes and NATO and all that other good stuff, those things matter, but they're not really the heart of what happened. What happened was a moral dilemma in the conservative movement, a moral fracture. What happened was cultural. What happened was a movement that once defined itself by a set of values slowly began to define itself by loyalty to a person. The reason I keep using McCain as an example is because he represented something that seems almost old-fashioned now. He believed there were things more important than winning. He believed there were lines decent people should never cross. He believed that telling supporters the truth was a part of leadership, even when they didn't want to hear it. One of the most famous moments of his career came when a supporter tried to portray Barack Obama as some kind of dangerous outsider, some kind of dangerous immigrant. McCain could have encouraged that. He could have benefited from it politically. He could have taken the easy applause. Instead, he corrected her. He defended the character of the man he was running against because he believed there was a difference between political disagreement and personal demonization. What the fuck happened to today? Can you imagine that happening today? Can you imagine a major political figure standing in front of thousands of supporters and telling them something they don't want to hear because it's the right thing to do? Can you imagine them risking boos in order to defend a political opponent from unfair attacks? Can you believe somebody standing up and saying, I don't believe that person who called Michelle Obama a man deserves to even be in the conservative movement or the political party? Not now one. I ain't heard not now one of y'all conservatives get up and say, have the decency to say that that's bad. Maybe I'm being cynical, but I have a hard time imagining that. one person would do it. Not because good people don't exist anymore, but because the incentives have changed. Today's outrage is rewarded. Humiliation is rewarded. Conflict and loyalty are rewarded. And that is why I keep saying that Reagan and McCain are not really the story. The story is what happened to the people who claim to admire them. Because somewhere along the way, a movement that once talked about honor began talking about victory. A movement that once talked about principles began talking about loyalty. A movement, the conservative movement that once claimed no person was bigger than the Constitution, began to act as if their president, Donald Trump, was bigger than anything else. That's the transformation I want to talk about, because once you see it, you start seeing it everywhere. The more you look at the difference between conservatisms back then and what exists today, the harder it becomes to pretend that they're the same part of the same tradition, because they're not. Real conservatism is built around principles. The other one, this MAGA movement, is built around allegiance. That's not conservatism. And once I started thinking about the difference between principles and allegiance, I couldn't stop seeing it. I saw it in the way the movement talked about immigration. I saw it in the way it talked about America's role in the world. I saw it in the way it stopped asking what America should preserve and started asking who belongs here. Because one of the things that struck me was that the people calling themselves conservative seemed increasingly uncomfortable with some of the very things that made America what it was. Take immigration, for example. I know it's a loaded subject. I get all that. The moment you bring it up, people stop listening and start preparing their arguments. But stay with me for a second. I'm not talking about open borders. I'm talking about how conservatives used to talk about America itself. The America I grew up hearing about from conservatives was a confident country. It was a country so sure of itself that it wasn't afraid of people wanting to come here that were foreigners. Reagan didn't describe America as a nation under siege. Oh my God, we got so many immigrants here. I never heard that. He described it as a shining city on a hill. He described it as a place people look toward because of freedom, because they wanted to come here and be free and have opportunity and have hope. He believed America was strong enough to absorb people from different places and still remain America. Today, I hear something completely and utterly different. I hear people talk as if immigration itself is a threat. Not illegal immigration, not a broken system, immigration, period. I hear people talk about diversity as though it weakens the country. This country is one of the strongest and most resilient countries in the world, and we got that way through immigration and diversity. I hear people speak as though the American experiment somehow went wrong when it became more inclusive, when it introduced immigrants and it introduced Black people into its system. And that's where I find myself asking, what exactly are you conservatives, supposed conservatives, trying to conserve? What are you trying to conserve? Because the America Reagan talked about was already diverse. The America McCain served was already diverse. The American experiment has always involved people from different places becoming Americans. That's not some recent innovation. Oh my God, Biden opened up the borders. Biden did it. Biden did it. That's the story of the country. Every president has been a person that the borders were open for. Now y'all done got real goofy. What I see now isn't conservatism. It's not. It's an attempt to redefine who belongs here and who doesn't. It's an attempt to rewrite the American story. The same thing happened with America's role in the world. I wasn't always a fan of American foreign policy, and there are plenty of mistakes we can point to, right? But there was a time when conservatives believed America's alliances mattered. They believed democratic nations should stand together. They believed America's word meant something. Whether you agree with them or not, there was consistency there. Today, all I hear people talk about is NATO like it's a burden, like NATO did something wrong. I hear people talk about America's allies as if they're freeloaders. What the fuck is wrong with you? No, you people aren't conservative. John McCain was conservative. Ronald Reagan was conservative. I don't know what this is now. Again, Donald Trump sits right in the middle of this transformation. Reagan talked about American strength. Trump talks about American victimhood. Everybody's a victim. White men can't get the same opportunities as the black people. The white people getting discriminated against. The immigrants is taking everybody's job. The immigrants can't get here. Otherwise, we can't get ahead. All this victim shit. I don't want to hear nobody say nothing about nobody else being victims, because most of you people who call yourself supposed conservative, supposed Americans, white American nationalists, you're the biggest victims these days. The biggest victim. We can't get nothing because of those immigrants. We can't do nothing. Reagan spoke as though America was the leader of the free world. Trump speaks as though America is being cheated by the world. Somebody's scamming me. I don't know. We Americans, they just running all over us. We getting rolled. How the fuck is the most the baddest and the biggest and the richest country in the world getting scammed? Y'all please explain that to me. Explain how we getting scammed. Those are fundamentally Reagan's point of view and Trump's point of view. Those are fundamentally different worldviews. One comes from confidence. Reagan's comes from confidence. Trump's comes from resentment. I hear admiration for strong men that would have shot conservatives 20 or 30 years ago. And maybe that's what bothers me more than anything else. The indifference, the willingness to abandon a belief simply because the political winds changed, because a principle isn't supposed to work that way. If you believe something because it's right, you believe it whether your party is winning or your party is losing. If you believe something because it's true, you don't suddenly stop believing it because a politician tells you to. Y'all know fucking full well you people in Texas should never have nominated that piece of trash, Paxton. You never should have nominated that person. I have to point to that I have to point to that right now, because it's like, are you people kidding me? Are you people kidding me? This is what we have come to. Okay? This is what we have come to. I don't understand what's going on. Okay? We wanted people to be above the law. We wanted X, Y, and Z. Okay? I don't know what's going on. That's why I say this is a moral argument. Policy lets us argue statistics. Policy lets us argue percentages. Morality forces us to ask harder questions. Morality forces us to ask whether we still mean what we say. Morality forces us to ask whether we're willing to apply the same standards to our side that we apply to everybody else. Ken Paxton of Texas is trash. You're supposed to be the party of conservatism. You're supposed to be the party of moral values. You're supposed to be the party of religion and all that jazz. Yet you have trash as nominees. People like that. Okay? And that's where I think modern conservatism struggles the most. For years, conservatives told us no one was above the law. They told us institutions mattered. Constitution mattered. They told us respect for the rule of law separated America from the weaker nations. They told us the peaceful transfer of power was sacred. Then suddenly those principles became negotiable. Now every institution is judged according to whether it helps or hurts a political movement. Courts are respected when they rule the right way and condemned when they don't. Law enforcement is trusted when it serves the movement and distrusted when it doesn't. Elections are legitimate when they produce the desired result and suspicious when they don't. Everything has become conditional with you guys. Everything has become transactional with you guys. Everything has become about whether something benefits your movement rather than whether it's actually right or wrong. And that's why I think the real danger is, because once everything becomes conditional, once every principle depends on who benefits from it, something deeper starts to change. This movement itself starts to change. The culture starts to change. Emotional center of politics starts to shift. And maybe that's why I eventually realized this wasn't really about immigration, trade, NATO, or any kind of policy fight. The thing that finally convinced me something deeper had changed with the Conservative Party was the tone. It was the spirit. It was the way people started talking about America itself, like America is trash. What struck me wasn't a particular piece of legislation or a specific campaign promise. It was the emotional energy behind the movement. It was a feeling that anger had become the organized principle. It was a sense that outrage had replaced optimism and grievance had replaced confidence. The thing that finally convinced me that this wasn't conservatism, that the MAGA movement wasn't conservatism, that Donald Trump wasn't conservatism, it wasn't a policy disagreement. It wasn't immigration. It wasn't taxes. It wasn't NATO. It wasn't trade. It was the tone. It was a change in how people talked about the other side and how people talked about America. When I think back to the conservatism I remember, whether I agree with it or not, it wasn't built around convincing people they were victims. Like Donald Trump tried to convince this MAGA movement that they're victims of somebody else, victims of immigrants, victims of black people, victims of the system, victims of NATO taking advantages of, victims of us giving money to other countries and not getting something back. Victim, 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 victim. Okay. Built around telling Americans that everybody was out to get them. It wasn't built around turning every disagreement into an existential threat. There was a confidence that we had about America. There was a belief that America was strong enough to survive challenges without falling apart. And the first thing people in the chat section is going to say, well, y'all should be better. Y'all should be better. The immigrants should go home. The black people should control their kids. The black people should do this. Victim. That's a victim mentality. And you know who ushered that in? Donald Trump made y'all the victim. Y'all the victim of taxes. Y'all the victim of black people. Y'all the victim of immigrants. Y'all the victim of an unfair system. Victim, victim, victim. And then I look at what dominates the right, the conservative right today, and I see something completely different. I see a movement fueled by grievance and victimhood. And I don't think that happened by accident. Donald Trump deserves enormous responsibility for that, because every successful political leader teaches their followers how to see the world. See it how I see it. You like how I see it? This is how I see the world. I see America and white folks and all of them people. I see them as victims. This is what Donald Trump taught y'all. He didn't teach you conservatism because he's not conservative at all. Trump taught conservatives to see themselves as victims. Reagan told people they could build a better future. Trump tells people somebody stole the past. They stole your heritage. They're stealing your future. This is what Trump keeps telling y'all, victims. Reagan spoke the language of opportunity. Trump speaks the language of grievance and victimhood. That's a profound change in the emotional DNA of the conservative movement. I see a movement that wakes up angry and goes to bed angry. I see a movement that has been taught to view almost every institution, every election, every news story, every cultural change, and every disagreement as proof that somebody is trying to destroy them. And what strikes me is how exhausting you guys are. Imagine spending every day believing the country is being stolen from you. Oh my God, those immigrants are stealing from me. Those immigrants are stealing my heritage. Victim. That's what strikes me as so strange about modern MAGA politics. For decades, conservatives told everybody else to stop complaining. They told people life was fair, wasn't fair. They told people nobody owed them anything. They told people to work harder, take responsibility, stop being the victims. Then Donald Trump comes along and convinces millions of conservative people that they were the biggest victims in America. Where they be doing that at? Suddenly every problem became somebody else's fault. It ain't your fault. You ain't shitty worker. You ain't a shitty husband. You ain't a shitty human being. It's the black people's fault. You can't get ahead in your job. You can't get ahead in life. Prices are high. You can't afford shit. It's the fucking immigrants' fault. It's them shitty immigrants. It ain't your fault. You ain't a shitty worker. Donald Trump convinced a whole bunch of you mediocre motherfuckers that you were better than what you really were. So now you the victim. Suddenly there's somebody else to blame. And the irony is that the movement that once despised victimhood, the MAGA movement, became defined by victimhood. Imagine spending every day believing your neighbors are your enemies. Imagine spending every day believing that somebody who's not your color is your enemy. You're a victim. Imagine spending every day believing the schools are corrupt, courts are corrupt, media is corrupt, universities are corrupt, elections are corrupt. I ain't never heard this much. I ain't never heard nobody talk about fraud in elections at this high of a level until Donald Trump got in office, lying to all those MAGA folks, lying to all of y'all. And y'all believe anybody who disagrees with you is either brainwashed or evil. You should see the stuff I get in the damn comment section. Y'all please hit the like, share, and subscribe if you appreciate the content. If you over here, hit the like button. If you over here, hit the hate button. But hit the damn button. At some point, this shit stops being a political philosophy. At some point, it becomes an identity. This victimhood that you all have taken around you and wrapped around you. And that's why I think we crossed the line from conservatism to something else. Y'all crossed the line. Y'all, as I'm talking to MAGA people, have crossed the line from conservatism into victimhood. Because conservatism, at least the version I remember, wasn't supposed to be built around permanent outrage, permanent anger. It wasn't supposed to be built around permanent victimhood. It was supposed to be rooted in confidence. Confidence in the Constitution, confidence in the American people, confidence that the country could survive disagreements and elections and social change without collapsing. We're falling down a fucking rabbit hole, blaming victims, blaming immigrants, and blaming black folk. Today, all I hear from people is they sound terrified of the future. And here's the irony nobody talks about. The same people who accuse everybody else of wanting to change America are often proposing some of the most radical changes to America itself. Think about it. The movement that calls itself conservative regularly talks about dismantling institutions that have existed for generations. It talks about purging agencies. Oh my God, we got to get rid of NATO. NATO is scamming us. They scamming us. Talks about fundamentally changing the civil service. Talks about using government power in ways conservatives once warned us about using the fucking government. Talks about rewriting long-standing understandings of citizenship. Somebody's fucking with the Constitution, and you goofy motherfuckers are standing there waiting for them to fuck with the Constitution. The Constitution is something that should not be changeable, interchangeable. We have the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, all the 19th Amendment. We have all, y'all just sitting up there letting folks decide that they want to change it. When that's our Constitution, that's our roadmap for this country. And y'all just happy to see somebody deal with birthright citizenship when that's been the bedrock of our country forever. But y'all call yourself conservatives. Okay? That ain't conservatism. Conservatism means preserving something. You don't preserve something by tearing it apart and rebuilding it in your own image. And that's why I keep coming back to the word loyalty. Because if this were really about principles, there would be some lines that could not be crossed by you guys. Not talking about liberals or Democrats. We're talking about the conservative movement and the lines that should not be crossed. There would be some things supporters would refuse to defend. There would be some actions that would cause people to say, nah, Donald Trump, that bullshit is too far. That's not what I signed up for. Some of y'all have looked at some of these things and said, no, we ain't dealing with it. But a lot of y'all go along with that garbage. But what we've watched over the last 10 years since Donald Trump has been in office is something very, very different. We watch people adjust their belief system to fit the movement instead of asking the movement to lift up its beliefs. That's the part that troubles me. Not because I expect people to be perfect. Not because I think Democrats are perfect. Lord knows they ain't perfect. But because I remember being told for years that principles mattered. I remember being told that truth mattered, character mattered, personal responsibility, accountability mattered. And now I watch people, conservatives, excuse behavior they would have condemned 10 years ago without a second thought, standing on business. Not because the behavior changed, because the person changed. That's not what makes this different. The standard used to be the standard. Now the standard depends on who we're talking to. And once your standards become conditional, they're no longer standards. They're just wants. They're preferences. That's why I believe the comparison between traditional conservatism and MAGA is ultimately a moral comparison. It's a comparison between a movement that asked people to be loyal to ideas and a movement that increasingly asks people to be loyal to Donald Trump. It's a comparison between a movement that valued duty and honor and a movement that values combat and fighting. It's a comparison between a movement that valued optimism and a movement that thrives on being outraged. It's a comparison between a movement that believed America was strong enough to welcome people into its story and a movement that increasingly talks as though America is under siege from its own goddamn people. Make it make sense, y'all. This shit is wild. And maybe the saddest part is that many of the people participating in this transformation don't even realize that it's happening. You're not conservative. This is not the conservative movement. These people are still out here defending conservatism. You're not conservative. They still think they're protecting the values they grew up with. You ain't protecting the values you grew up with. These people still think they're preserving something when in reality, they're helping to transform it into something entirely different. That's why I don't believe traditional conservatism was defeated by liberals. I don't believe it was defeated by Democrats or defeated by the media. Traditional conservatism was abandoned by the MAGA party. And Donald Trump is the one who held the banner and walked down the street. And all of the people in MAGA walked behind him. I believe millions of people slowly stopped demanding that their leaders live up to principles and instead starting changing the principles to fit their leaders. Ain't no way in hell Donald Trump should be the leader of the Republican Party with as many flaws and character defects and degeneracy. Ain't no way if you consider the conservative. Ain't no way. And Donald Trump deserves a huge share. He deserves that huge share of responsibility for that. Conservatism didn't die because Donald Trump defeated it in some great intellectual debate. Conservatism died because Trump discovered that grievance and victimhood from the majority white folks was more powerful than their principles. He discovered that resentment was more powerful than optimism. He discovered that loyalty was more powerful than his character, their character, the Republican Party's character. And once the movement learned those lessons, the old conservatism never really recovered from that. And once that happened, the fight was over because a political philosophy can survive losing elections. A political philosophy can survive losing leaders. What it cannot survive is losing its identity. That's what I think happened to the conservative movement. It didn't lose a campaign. It didn't lose a debate. It lost itself. It was loyalty dressed up as conservatism. And that brings me to the question I've been asking myself throughout this entire conversation. If this isn't conservatism, if the MAGA movement is not conservatism, and it's not, then what direction is it trying to take this country? What direction are y'all trying to take this country? Because one of the traps Americans keep falling into is believing the only choices available are whatever MAGA wants or whatever the Democrats want. The moment we accept that false dichotomy, we stop asking whether either path is actually good for America. We stop asking whether the country is becoming stronger, more stable, more united, and more confident. We simply pick a team and convince ourselves our side must be right. What worries me is not that conservatives exist. America needs conservatives. Every healthy democracy needs people who value responsibility, stability, restraint, accountability. What worries me is watching a movement call itself conservative while moving further and further away from the very values that once defined conservatism. And that brings me to the most personal part of this conversation. I don't believe America was designed to be a place where everybody thinks the same way, looks the same way, worships the same way, or comes from the same background. That's not America. In fact, the entire American experiment is built on the opposite thought. The whole point was that people from different places could somehow create a common identity without surrendering their individuality. That's the miracle. That's the experiment. That's what has always made America different. When I listen to some of these loudest MAGA people, I don't hear confidence in that experiment. I hear fear. I hear people talking as though diversity itself is a problem to be solved. I hear people talking as though disagreement is a threat. I hear people talking as though entire groups of Americans are somehow less American because they vote differently, worship differently, love differently, live in different places, or see the world through a different lens. That isn't the America that I want. I don't want an America where every election is treated like a civil war. I don't want an America where every political opponent is treated like an enemy, that people that are immigrants are treated like enemies of the state. I don't want an America where people spend more time proving their loyalty to a politician like Donald Trump than proving their loyalty to the country. And that's why I keep saying this is not conservatism. Whatever you people got on the right, whatever you people call yourself a Republican, you ain't conservative. Conservatism is supposed to conserve. It's supposed to preserve the Constitution regardless of who is in the White House. Preserve democratic norms. Preserve peaceful transfers of power. Preserve respect for institutions, even when those institutions occasionally frustrate us. It's supposed to preserve the idea that no individual is bigger than the country. What I see now often looks less like conservatism and more like destruction followed by reconstruction. Tear down this institution. Tear down tradition, norm, agency, alliance, safeguard. Tear down that guardrail. And after everything has been torn down, we're supposed to trust that the people doing the tearing down will somehow build something better. You see how Donald Trump tore up that agreement that Barack Obama made? And now you notice that he got a shittier deal. He's got a shittier deal than what Obama had. A shittier deal. History is filled with people who promised that they would build the country up. History is filled with movements that promised that. History is filled with leaders who convinced their followers that every institution was corrupt. Every opponent was evil. Every problem could be solved if people would simply put their trust in you. Trust me, I'm Donald Trump. That path rarely ends well, because if your faith in America only exists when your candidate wins, then your faith isn't really in America. If your faith is democracy only, if your faith in democracy only exists when your side wins, then faith isn't really in democracy. If your faith in institutions only exists when they help your side, then your faith isn't really in institutions. It's in power. And that's the distinction I think has been lost. I grew up believing that America was constantly trying to become a more inclusive version of itself. Not a perfect country, not a flawless country, not a country without mistakes, but a country trying, however imperfect, to expand the circle of who belongs there. That project ain't finished. It never will be. But I don't want to go backwards. I don't want to return to some imaginary version of America that only works well for certain people. I don't want a country that becomes more suspicious, more fearful, more divided, and more hostile to its own diversity. Because that's the direction grievance politics always takes a country. It teaches people to look for enemies instead of solutions. It teaches people to blame instead of build. It teaches people that somebody else is responsible for their unhappiness. Y'all give me a fucking break with this victimhood shit that y'all seem to want to swallow your whole being. MAGA is a movement of victimhood. That's why I reject Trumpism as a governing philosophy. I reject any and all Trumpism. A country cannot thrive when its citizens are constantly taught to see themselves as victims of one another. I want a country that's confident enough to handle our differences, confident enough to handle disagreement, confident enough to welcome people into the American story, into the American fabric, instead of constantly looking for ways to exclude them. That's why I reject the idea that this movement, this MAGA movement, represents conservatism. It's not the conservatism America needs. America absolutely needs conservatives. We need people who care about the responsibility, who care about fiscal discipline, the people who care about community service, duty, accountability, all that. And we need people who put the Constitution above politicians, above the president. We need conservatives who put country above party, who can lose an election without losing their faith in democracy. We need conservatives who understand that strength and cruelty are not the same thing. And we need conservatives who understand that patriotism and nationalism are not the same thing. What I believe is that America desperately needs people who are willing to put principle above personalities. We need people who care more about the Constitution than they care about Donald Trump. We need people who understand that patriotism is loyalty to a country, not loyalty to a leader. We need people who can disagree without treating one another like enemies and lose elections without losing faith in democracy itself. Because this isn't really about Donald Trump. Donald Trump is one man. Eventually, he will leave the political stage just like every president, senator, governor, and political party or celebrity before him. The real question is what happens afterwards. Will people remember the principles they once claimed to believe? Will they remember the character matters? Remember that honesty matters? Remember that the country is bigger than any movement and any political party and any politician. Because if they do, conservatism may yet find its way back to the principles that made it recognizable in the first place. But y'all who call yourself conservatives now, y'all done lost yourself. You have lost yourself. But if loyalty remains the highest value, if every belief remains conditional on who is speaking, and if every principle remains negotiable whenever power is at stake, then what we're looking at isn't conservatism at all. It's something else. And that's why this conversation matters. Because the future of the country will not be decided by whether Republicans win or Democrats win. It will be decided by whether Americans can still recognize the difference between principle and loyalty, between patriotism and partisan, between citizenship and following a leader. And I think this America is waking up to what we don't want. We don't want the direction that we're going in. We just don't. The moment we lose the distinction between party loyalty and the Constitution and the people and our leaders, instead of following leaders that we shouldn't be following, we stop being self-governing people and start becoming followers and worshipers. When historians look back on this period, I don't think they'll say Donald Trump saved conservatism. No, I think they'll say he transformed it. He changed it for the worse. They'll say he took a movement built around responsibility and redirected it towards grievance and victimhood. They'll say he took a movement built around principles and redirected it towards loyalty. They'll say he took a movement that once celebrated confidence and taught it to embrace the victim mentality. And that's why I believe Donald Trump belongs at the center of this story. Not because he created every problem, but because he turned those problems into the defining identity of that movement, the MAGA movement, the movement that's not conservative, not at all. And that is not a direction I believe America wants to go. And I don't believe we can afford to go that way. So if you like my commentary, please put a like, share, and subscribe. on the moniker, hit the like button, hate button, subscribe button, content button. And let me see what's in the chat. Please and thank you for being here, guys. Nobody worships Trump. Yeah, you do worship Trump. That's the problem. You've allowed this loyalty to ruin our country. You've allowed this loyalty to put you guys on the victimhood train. Now you guys are the victim. Ain't nobody else the victim. Y'all the victims. You all are the victims now. And see, when people are victims, they don't really see that they're victims. But this is not conservatism. Absolutely not conservatism. Okay? John McCain, Ronald Reagan were conservative. Mitt Romney is a conservative. This is not conservatism, period. So, as I said, if you like my content, please hit a like, share, subscribe. I appreciate it. And I will see you guys, I don't know, maybe tomorrow morning. I don't know, but definitely tomorrow evening. I will see you guys again, and I appreciate you guys coming out. Okay?